An array is a collection of data where the order of the data is fixed. Visual Basic supports both fixed-size arrays and resizable arrays. Fixed-size arrays are sometimes called simple arrays, and they're a part of the language itself. Resizable arrays are implemented in a class called ArrayList, and I'll demonstrate them both here in a project called Arrays. I'll add code to the subroutine run code and show a few different ways of declaring simple arrays. I'll start by creating a variable called fruits, and I'll indicate that this is going to be an array by adding an opening and closing parenthesis after the variable name. Then I'll set the data type of the items in the array as string. Here's one way of declaring an array, using a simple syntax where you wrap a comma-delimited list of values inside a pair of braces. I'll create a set of 3 strings, apple, orange, and pear. Then I'll report the number of items in the array using a property that's available on all arrays called length. I'll use my output subroutine, and I'll output a label of number of fruits, and I'll append to that the expression fruits.length.toString. I'll run that code and test it, and there's the result. When I create an array in this way, the number of items is fixed based on the number of items in the list. But here's another way of declaring an array. I'll create another array that I'll call vegetables, and this time I'll pass in a value of 2 between the parentheses. That means I'm creating the array with 2 available slots. Once again, I'll set the data type of the items in the array as a string. Now I have 2 available slots, and I refer to them by their index positions. The numeric index of the first item in the array is 0. The next one will be 1, and if there were more, they would be 2, 3, and so on. In Visual Basic, you refer to index positions with parentheses. So I'll say that the item in slot 0 is potato, and that the item in the second slot is lettuce. Now I'll show a way of looping through the array and outputting the values in it. I'll use a for loop. I've shown in previous movies that you can use something called for each to loop through an array, but you can also do a loop through an array using a simple numeric for loop with a counter variable. I'll create a counter variable called veg for vegetable, and I'll say that it's an integer, and I'll set its initial value to 0, and then I'll set the upper value to vegetables.length -1. When I press enter, Visual Studio adds the next keyword, and within the loop, I'll create a new string variable that I'll call veg_name, that'll be a string, and I'll get its value by passing in the veg counter variable, and then I'll output it. And there's the result. In Visual Basic simple arrays, the index value starts counting at 0 and then moves up from there. And that's the same as in Java, C#, and other C-style languages. Now, as I've mentioned, simple arrays have a fixed size. Once you declare them, you can't add or remove items completely. If you need a resizable array, create an instance of the class ArrayList. To demonstrate this, I'll declare an array list, but I'll do it outside of any of my procedures. I'll place the cursor above the run code subroutine, and I'll create a new variable called names that I'll data type as ArrayList, and I'll initialize this using the ArrayList constructor method and the new keyword. The ArrayList class has a few different constructors. I'll be using the simple one with no arguments, but you can also pass in an integer value to set the initial capacity. This will get you better performance if you know ahead of time how many items you're going to put into the array list. And you can also pass in something called a collection. But I'll just use the simple constructor method. Now, each time the user clicks the button, I'm going to take the value that's been typed into the input text box and add it to this array list. I don't need this code anymore, so I'm going to comment it out. I'll select it, then choose Edit, Advanced, Comment Selection. And then down here, I'll add the value from the text input box to the array list. I'll create a new variable called name, data type it as string, and get its value from txtinput.text. Then I'll call the add method of the array list using names.add, and I'll pass in name. Next, I'll clear the output text box with txtoutput.text equals a blank string. Finally, I'll loop through the contents of the array list. As I have in previous movies, I'll use the for each construct, and I'll say for each name in names. Now notice I'm not setting the data type of name here because I've already set it up here. And within the for each loop, I'll output the current name. Because I declared the array list outside of any of the subroutines, it will persist. It'll stay in memory, and I'll be able to keep on adding items as long as the user keeps on typing values in. I'll run the code, and I'll type in my name, and I'll click Go, and I see my name appear. I'll type in somebody else's name, and somebody else's, and so on and so forth. The ArrayList class has an extensive set of methods that you can use to manage your ordered data. I've shown how to use the add method, and there are also methods such as clear, contains, remove, and others. Use the array list whenever you need a resizable array, and use simple arrays whenever you need a fixed size array in your Visual Basic code.